and sometimes we will have the willingness to go right into that edge and over the edge. And there are times where it's like, no, it's too much. I'm not safe enough yet. And we would begin to build that safety. What Alec noticed was that, if you were in the session and you could change your intention in the session will shift. Your breath will change, the sensations in your body change. And so you have a way out that's authentic to you.
Welcome to the Enlighten podcast, the enlightened journey of life. Because we're not just here to chase enlightenment, we are here to live life, to embody all aspects of ourselves, to bring the sacred into every day. I'm your host, Jen Hamilton, self-mastery mentor, tantra guide, and sacred rebel at heart. This podcast is a devotion to the art of knowing thyself. Through solo snippets, raw musings, and deep conversations with epic guests, we explore the sacred, the sensual, and the spiritual, diving deep into self-exploration and always leaving you with something to take away. This isn't just a podcast, it's a portal to awaken, to liberate, to remember who you truly are. It is an honor to have you here. Let's get enlightened. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Enlighten podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and my very, very special guest today is Joanne Sanna. Joanne is actually my big sister. Born under a Libran sun and a Gemini moon, Joanne is of Italian-Australian ancestry and is a Rebirthing Breathwork Mastery facilitator with the School of Breathwork. Joanne is passionate to support people in their journey towards living authentically, consciously, and masterfully. She's committed to create a space where each person feels seen, valued, and connected to their truth. Joanne is enlivened by the possibilities created when we attune to our breath, our body, and our pure potentiality. Joanne embraces a profound awe and reverence in witnessing this sacred practice transforming lives and honors the path towards remembering your innate wholeness. It was an absolute pleasure to share a cacao and share the microphone with my sister. So without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Enlighten podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and I'm joined by a very special guest. And we're not supposed to pick favorites as hosts. However, this one's kind of a special one because this is my beautiful sister, Joanne. Joanne is joining me for a cacao. Cheers, Jo. We went to cheers before and chow came out of her mouth and we just lost it laughing because I wasn't expecting a chow. I was expecting a cheers.
Yeah.
And one thing I know about Jo is always expect the unexpected.
Yeah.
Now, this beautiful soul here is my older sister. So, I mean, both ridiculously good looking, but clearly I got the genes.
Clearly. Yeah.
What's a podcast without some sibling rivalry?
No, totally. I'm here for it. Yeah.
First of all, we'd like to say hi to our mum. Hi, Mum.
Hey, Mum. We definitely know that you're listening to this one. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, Jo and I have so much in common, and Jo's gone down a path of breathwork and RBM, and I brought her on today because not only is RBM which we'll talk about even what RBM means, but the phenomenal journey that she's been on that's brought her to being a facilitator of RBM. So first of all, again, welcome, Jo.
Thanks, Jen. And I think, I don't know, I'd offer a reflection to yourself and what you may have seen in the last 2 years, because it's been a 2-year training. It's Rebirthing Breathwork Mastery, and it's really been a process of going deep myself so that I have the capacity but I really honor the capacity to go where I need to go and where others can go in that journey. It's not something that I did in a weekend or a week in Bali, but it has been an epic journey for me. And you say expect the unexpected, and I think that that's an interesting reflection on myself because I was all about expectation, and now I'm a lot more freer in life.
Yeah, I've noticed such a massive transformation in you, how you show up to the world, how you deal with things, how you just, it's been amazing. So can you please share what RBM even is, And then we can sort of dive into how it's different maybe from the traditional breath work, because breath work's like an up and coming trend now. I feel
it's
like
here. It's not even up and coming. It's here.
Well, yeah, I feel like
really
there's just
here.
been this trend. Like if you remember 15 odd years ago, every second person was popping up as a personal trainer.
Yeah.
Do you remember that? Like there was just PTs ever. Everyone was doing their weekend course or their month-long course to be a PT, which was great. You know, the healthier, the better, you know, all for it. And then it was like life coaches, exhibit A over here. Yeah. I am diploma trained though in like clinical hypnotherapy, strategic psychotherapy. So I kind of just didn't do the weekend life coaching course. Like there's different aspects of it, but everyone was becoming a life coach. And I feel like everyone's becoming a breathwork facilitator now. Like I feel like there's been a trend, and not only have we seen a trend in breathwork, which any sort of modality that supports someone to grow, evolve, and ultimately heal is amazing. Don't get me wrong, I'm not putting this down, but I kind of got my back up a little bit when you see these really big events of like hundreds of people being run. Or one thing I cannot stand is someone facilitating on someone and they've got the eye mask on, they're having a shift, but it's being recorded for social media.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I can't stand it. Right. So that's my 2 cents piece.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up, because that, I think, I feel really passionate about the distinctions of rebirthing breathwork mastery. One of my biggest inspirations from the beginning actually was acknowledging that this wasn't something that someone has adapted from somebody else and has taken on their own way of doing something, and all of a sudden they're holding space for 100 people in a room and there's one, maybe two other people there facilitating, supporting. This style of breath work is lineage based. So it actually, my teacher's teacher is Alec Anelda, and she founded Rebirthing Breathwork Mastery, like, I want to say in the 80s, ultimately. 80s, 90s, that's when she was developing a lot further. She came from a lineage of yoga. She was a sannyas, so she was a renunciate. She was living in an ashram in India, and then she had to return to Australia for visa things, and she was a bit like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, but was offered to attend a retreat to teach yoga at. And I think this was a breathwork retreat then. It was Rebirthing Breathwork, which is the lineage of Leonard Orr, who developed it in the 60s. So then she noticed, and she started really bringing in her aspects of yoga and the traditions and the philosophy of that, and this style of rebirthing breathwork, and really, generated this style that is self-generating, that activates what we know now as the parasympathetic system in the body. And it really uses a slower, fuller, and gentler breath. There is no force. There is no agenda held by a facilitator. And the space is highly supported. So you will, when we have retreats, like big retreats, you may have 4 or 5 facilitators, trained facilitators, and then there will be anywhere between 8, 10, 12 assists who are potentially in training, to a group of anywhere between 16 and 20. So it is a highly supported practice. It is it is a gentle style of breath work, but it still activates those non-mundane, non-linear experiences that will take you into potentially an altered state where you have the opportunity to shift and transform your life ultimately.
Yeah. So not lighthearted work, really.
No, and no, totally not. And I think that anyone going into this, you can sign up for a retreat, but when you sign up for training, you sign up for the deep inner work, because your psyche knows, and I'm sure that you've experienced this, you could probably do a weekend course in hypnotherapy or, what have you, or you could just attend a retreat, a weekend retreat. When you sign up for training, it's like your whole being, your whole psyche knows that you've got you've committed to going deep. And that was my commitment and willingness from the very beginning. The first part of your training is really going deep yourself. And I think that's what really is also distinguishing it from other styles of breath work, where you can spend up to a year, 6 months to a year, in actually doing, like, it's not even doing the work yourself, but really going deep within and unpacking so that you get to create the life that you want. But it's actually all within. Like, everything is within you to do the work. And this process is a self-revealing but also self-generated process. Yeah,
I love that. And it's really interesting because you're a Libran.
I am a Libran sun.
And so your sun sign is an air sign. And so you work with the breath. And
I hadn't even thought of it that way.
Yeah, this is my observation of a few things through like the expansion of self-mastery. And so what I found is the way in which I connect to that side of things is working with the medicines of the earth, so psychedelics. So working with like Mama Aya and Acacia, working with mushrooms, so working with these beautiful like psychedelic plant medicines. And as an earth sign, I resonate really like very much with what the earth has to provide in order for me to find myself. Yeah.
That's really fascinating, because I'll reflect on my experience with plant medicine, or what I called earth medicine. And I've had journeys with psilocybin, with mushrooms. And for me, it was an epic experience, and it revealed a lot to me. Things that I'd probably known, but it was this fully drop in of aha. And I was like, how have I not connected this sooner? And yet my experience, which I think is, I was speaking about this earlier before we sat down, is that my experience has always been to get to the root cause and come from the very kind of that, which is very earth-based. But what I found with these medicines was that it took me from like 0 to 100 without, which is phenomenal. It's phenomenal. But for me, it's like, I don't know, and maybe this is my constitution, maybe it's actually all of my chart, maybe it's a little bit of human design, but it's for me, it's really important to, I think it's been about the journey, and actually to like, those experiences were epic, but it was like this was coming from within me, and it could only be my process. And like, I mean, medicines are only what is within you, but this was self-activating. And I think that was really important. And one of the largest distinctions too is with RBM, with Rebirthing Breathwork Mastery, is that we all have this innate safety mechanism. And that innate safety mechanism comes into play during a session, and you will only go where you're safe enough to go, ready enough, supported enough, willing enough to go. You won't just jump into an altered state unless you actually, for me, my journey has been about building levels of safety before I could go into experiences that were only coming from my own experience, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And with the thing is with psychedelics, once you start, there is no getting out of that for hours. And it is deep. Like, there is a lot, like nothing can prepare you for your first psychedelic experience. So my first psychedelic experience was with mushrooms, and then even like to sit with Aya, or I sat with the Australian version Acacia for a long time before I actually sat with the ayahuasca vine. And it was really interesting because I had friends that were in the space, and some friends that were, that sat fairly regularly. And I remember one friend said to me, if you have to die, die. Like, it's the closest thing that you will experience to dying. And I could not comprehend that until I was in the journey fighting what felt like my death. And I'm like, I get it now. And I'm like, I don't want to leave my children. I don't want to die. And I was gripping on so tightly. And I couldn't recall anything that my friend had said to me about, like, that's the letting go part. But it pummels you. It forces you into a space that can be very healing, but is wildly uncomfortable and shocking. It is like, and it's relentless. Like, this goes on for hours. And I've had some really beautiful journeys. I've had some incredibly, like, I remember this one journey that I had, I think it was about my third journey that I ever did. And I only had one cup. and I was like just so connected to my heart. It was like I was a little kid that had lost its blankie somewhere and then being reunited with its blankie. And that was me being reunited with my heart. And it was so beautiful.
Yeah.
And pretty much every other time outside of that, and I've done quite a number of journeys, everything outside of that has been massive shifts and requires a really deep level of integration. Everything does. Every time you do anything that's transformative in any kind of way is going to require integrating what you learn, what you're unlearning, what you're deconditioning yourself from. There is a process that you go through. And I always find, like, I always create space in my calendar if I'm going to go to a retreat for plant medicine, because I know that for days afterwards I'm going to come back and I'm like trying to find my feet again going, what the fuck? And so, and I love it because I'm an all-in person. Like, I skydive for fun. I bungee jump for fun. I love the thrill.
You love the edge.
I love the edge. And I meet myself every time I meet myself at the edge, I meet a new version of myself on the other side of that. And because I love what life can offer me as far as growth, I chase that. It's the same reason why in the middle of winter, as much as I hate cold water, I really enjoy going in the ocean or just jumping into fresh water or ice baths. There's certain things that I know, like, just shock my soul awake. Whereas, like, the thought of breath work, I'm like, that's nice. That's cute.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But for some people, like yourself, that is the entry point that's needed in order. And not saying that it leads you into anything else like medicine. They're two very different things that can give both awakenings. And because plant medicine is not for everybody, I will say this until the cows come home, that plant medicine is not for everybody. Psychedelics are not for everybody, not only from a psychological and mental health perspective, but a physiology perspective as well.
I think constitutionally too, because that's what I found out about myself, is that, like, it wasn't really, I mean, it was incredible and it was revealing, but it wasn't, I don't think it didn't change anything for me. It was revealing and it was only, but it wasn't changing anything for me. A couple of things I want to say to what you were speaking to is, in a psychedelic session, you're like, it's like from, being on that mundane experience and being conscious, and it's like, boom, onto death's bed. And not having a way out for several hours. The incredible thing that Alec and Elder witnessed is one of the fundamental emphases is an intention before we go in. And I'm sure you said intentions with plant medicine. Absolutely. The thing about RBM is that if we reach that edge in the breathwork session, during this session, what Alec noticed is that we can, and sometimes we will have the willingness to go right into that edge and over the edge. And there are times where it's like, no, it's too much. I'm not safe enough yet. And we would begin to build that safety. What Alec noticed was that, if you were in the session and you could change your intention in the session will shift. Your breath will change. The sensations in your body change. And so you have a way out that's authentic to you. And that, you have that opportunity if you're not ready to go there. And there's nothing wrong with not being ready to go there, because even that process of that shift happening will reveal something about a pattern or a belief or something in life. And so that's also fundamental to remember, that it's not like you're in and you can't get out, There was something else that you said, and it's not quite coming back to me now, but that's what stood out in that. And I've certainly gone to those edges, and I will say, sharing some of my processes, or some of my process, I have met edges, and I have met death and dying and complete emptiness, and also experienced bliss and oneness with everything. So, we have these levels of experience. We have, the physical, we can, in a session, there's a lot of, we can have physical experiences in the body, sensations, physical sensations. There's mental and emotional levels that we move through, and deeply spiritual. And, the spiritual is very personal, but that definitely that sense of oneness. And for me, what that oneness then gave me is an acknowledgement and a remembering that we are inseparable with everything. And then what that gave me in life was just this, I feel really emotion rising, just this freedom to be who we authentically are.
I love that.
That doesn't always show up in everyday life. We will have the activations, our partners might leave a tissue on the floor and it's the 5th time that day. And we can get really triggered by that. But what I've noticed is that, breath, by integrated breath, the spaciousness to see a tissue on the floor as opposed to the material and that trigger and why I'm getting upset about it, just pick it up myself. Do you know what I mean? So it's the everyday experiences that, when we create this spaciousness for something like the tissue on the floor, we create the spaciousness to actually, and the freedom within ourselves to be who we truly are. Without that, like why is the tissue on the floor activating me? Do you know what I mean? And it's like when you create this spaciousness, and when you realize, you kind of decondition and reprogram all the stories about the tissue on the floor that are running so subconsciously, so in the background, but cause a rift in the relationship, it just, the spaciousness and the freedom that comes back in, and just, when you just feel so light because you're not triggered by anything, and you're like, and yes, we can have these bliss experiences and these connecting, with ancestors and oneness and inseparableness with all that is. But what that looks like in everyday life for me is the important thing, because, I've tried lots of different things, and it's in the session, I feel really alive and enlightened, but it's like in everyday life, I'm still really feeling constricted and limited and really caught up in patterns that keep me stuck and thwarted from moving forward.
Yeah. I love that. I'd love to hear from you. Like what got you into this? Like, what was it? Was there a catalyst? Or did you go to a breathwork experience and you were like, hey, there's something in this? Like, I actually don't know this person. I probably should know this because you're my sister.
But this is why we're here.
Exactly. Tell us about that journey for you.
Yeah, one sip of cacao. I mean, I think that I have had I get emotional about this now. I'm really emotional.
Librans.
Totally. Cacao, Gemini moon. I think that for a long time in my life I've been in a lot of pain, a lot of, and I'll say a lot of existential pain. For a long time in my life, I've had the biggest questions, like, who am I? Why am I here? And what am I doing? And if you want to take this back, it was definitely in my very early teenage years in a lot of pain, and being brought up in a very a predominantly Catholic background, with the Catholic version and understanding of God, a God. I was, I remember that time, and I was like, who is this God? If I'm in all this pain and there's all this pain in life, who is this God?
Yeah.
And I started questioning that. And you might remember I was like, and I was trying to find my way through to these answers. And in my teenage years, I don't know, do you remember I was into like the witchcraft stuff and the paganism?
Oh yeah, I remember that. You there was like this subscription that you could get from the newsagent every week, and it was like you just add to this folder every week of like all of these different things.
Mystic ritual, like
that was pretty esoteric. Edgy back in the day.
I was so edgy.
You were.
But I was empty edgy, like it still wasn't fulfilling me.
Yeah.
And I had the witchcraft books and spells. I mean, it was around the time that, the movie The Craft.
The Craft. Oh my God. The Craft had impact on so many of us growing up.
Yeah. So
absolutely.
I mean, that was like to the extreme. I wasn't that talented, but I didn't have that level of, mastery.
I mean, like, let's just side note here that you went from witchcraft and then fast forward into herbalism later in life. Tell me you weren't a witch in a past life. Like, come on.
Thanks for making that connection, because there are a lot of herbalists out there that are like really witchy. And I'm like, I am so not
witchcraft back in the day was working with herbs, with plants.
Working with plants and working with the earth.
Exactly 100%. Exactly that. And I think going back to, when growing up in the 90s and the early 2000s, when we were going through this together, really, and I was very much following in your footsteps. I was like, if Joe's doing it, I'm going to be cool like Joe. And what I found was that we were always looking for something. It was almost like we didn't want to go to church anymore. We were kind of just like confused about the messaging in church. There was community, there was food after church every time, which is why I loved it. So true.
I forgot about that aspect.
It was the best part. We go to Sunday mass,
church gatherings. That's right.
Yeah, there was a whole window of food. There was a whole window, a whole servery, and Mum would talk to her friends, and we're like, "Fuck yeah, Lamingtons."
Yeah, totally. Oh, I love this.
We'd get cups of tea for Mum, and it's like, keep talking so we can keep playing.
Too. Oh, I love how you're remembering this.
Yeah. So everyone was gathered out the front, and we got to see our friends, and we're all, dressed up for Sunday mass, And
but I was really in the church. Like I was the altar server.
I was an altar server. Exactly. Yeah.
And we were really immersed. Until there was a time in our lives that it was like, there was, it was the right time for something else to be revealed.
Yeah, the breaking free of.
Yeah. And so then there was that. And then I remember studying in high school. There was a subject that offered like an overview of all these different religious and spiritual traditions around the world. And I was captivated. I was fascinated by, indigenous wisdom from all over the world, fascinated by religions that, there are religions and there's spiritualities, and I really gravitated towards Buddhism and Hinduism.
Yeah, I remember that.
So the Eastern concepts of that. And so the later teenage years, early 20s, I was, the Buddhist philosophy really spoke true to me. I would go to monasteries in Brisbane. I would connect with the communities, the Buddhist communities here. Lots of meditation. And I continued that for a while. And then my fascination grew about India. And I mean, later on in life, I was my first time to India. I did travel to India by myself for a few months. And that concept really spoke to me. But actually early 20s, late teenage years, I actually started yoga.
That's right. Yeah. I bought you some yoga books for Christmas one year because that's what was on your wish list. Yeah. Joe always had this really long wish list, and it was great because it was like a registry, really.
Yeah. And so back then, I started yoga when I was living in New Farm / Fortitude Valley, dodgy end of Fortitude Valley, and I started with a school there, and I think that's where it was like the awareness of where I could take my body and my breath really grew, and the changes that I witnessed in my body when practicing yoga. And a lot of my initial years with yoga was about asana, was about the physical manifestation of the practice and the philosophy. And then I slowly moved into really, and fast forward until more recent years, was really deepening my knowledge and my practice with the philosophy. And what really appealed to me is, I was with an ashram for several years, stayed in ashrams in India. And I think but it was still a search, I was, there was this promise of like, we are all one and we are all connected, that I really went deep in an ashram with Vedanta and Advaita Vedanta, which is non-dualism, so that we are inseparable. we are ultimately oneness and wholeness and completeness. We are like, we don't even have to do anything to be that. It's all of the conditioning and all of our patterns and all of our previous lives and all of the things that, you know, layer up on top of that we forget, we become blind to.
Yeah.
But I was with that for so long, but it always felt like I was searching for something outside of myself. And because what I identified and I knew right before I stepped into RBM training and that path was this deep hollowness and emptiness within inside myself. I would have experiences where I'd be in a place that I would call home, my home environment, and I was with my partner, I might be with my puppy, and I just feel so alone and so empty and I was like, there was this like inner dialogue of, I just want to go home. And I couldn't understand. Yeah. And I couldn't understand it. No. And it was coming from this real emptiness and incompleteness. I spent many years with an ashram and many years in the teachings and, you know, very knowledge based and very cognitive based. And you know that I'm a very academic person and I love to dwell in those spaces. But I actually think that there's a protection mechanism from being in my body, because my body hasn't been a safe space to listen to and to land and to actually live life from. And so, and, you know, in maybe earlier years in my life, going into my head kept me safe from an external environment and being in my body and actually really feeling what I was experiencing. So knowing that, it was a transition from the ashram to kind of this big separation going, well, I'm not feeling fulfilled by this either, because it's not even changing my life. The knowledge and all of the teachings and all the philosophy isn't changing my life. And I actually had two, what is more commonly seen as, I mean, she adapted it, but it more is along the lines of holotropic breath work.
Oh, yes. Yep.
So it is, for those who don't know, it's often it can be in a room with lots of people. I did one-on-one sessions with a practitioner who had adapted it and styled it the way that she felt right. Again, it wasn't through a lineage. She'd just done some training and adapted it. She was also a yoga teacher. It is hard. It is fast. It is through your mouth. You're breathing in and out through your mouth. And there was lots of like heavy sound, lots of big drumming and heavy music, and it felt powerful. And I got this, like, you know, for those who have maybe done, you know, the Wim Hof and the ice bath, and you get the rush and you're like, and that is really activating some, you know, and there are some breaths that really take us to that activating point, and there's a lot revealed in that. For me, afterwards, I kind of fell apart. Actually, after my first session, you and I were at the Mooloolaba unit together, and I had done a session. I don't know if you remember this, and I came back and I was falling apart. You probably don't. I don't think you remember.
How long ago was this?
Oh, before RBM, so maybe like 3 years ago.
Can't remember what I did last week, but yeah.
So I was activated by this process. There was no integration afterwards. There wasn't
yes,
you remember?
Just landed.
Yeah,
and then I think you eventually told me what had happened.
Yeah, because I was so
You hadn't told me. Yeah, you hadn't told me what you were doing. You told me that you were going somewhere. You had an appointment or something, and I was like, "You know what? You've been to an exorcism or something."
This was the beginning of COVID, because I remember having a conversation with the practitioner, and she's like, "Oh, what do you think?" And we're like, "I'm totally okay with this," you know, because it was the whole lockdown thing. Yeah, we were so totally okay with that. And so that's when it was.
Right.
Wow, that's 5 years ago.
2020. Yeah, wow. Interesting. Yeah, that's
2020. So, and I was like, I had two sessions, because I thought, well, maybe it's just me. Like, maybe it's me, and I've released all this stuff, but I had released all this stuff. All of this stuff had come to the surface, and there was no support for that. And it, you know, and also what I experience even with psychedelics is I go from the ground to right up here. And there's no, and that's what I found in that breathwork process, is that I went, it was like, it took me more out of my body. Yeah. You know, and for me, like, I don't know, I think constitutionally, I think my astral charts, I think that that's not where I like, that is a disservice to me.
Absolutely.
It's it's a disconnection, potentially, if you want to label it a disassociation. But it was this so heightened level of disassociation that I fully flung out of my body.
Yeah, you're like,
wee! But it wasn't a wee excitement. It was like, fuck, what do I do now? And I just left that for so long and fell apart even further. And then I don't know, I will say that I came across Gabor Mate's work.
We love Gabor.
We love Gabor. I came across his book, The Myth of Normal. And I remember hearing about him on a podcast, really tapped into this book. I still remember going into Big W and buying the book, I will say. And I was so nervous about it. Brendan's like, just go and buy the book, And so I just went and bought the book. And it was a revelation to me. It allowed me, it supported me to make sense of like so much of my experience in life. And that would have been the end of 2022. And I remember reading a particular segment in the book where Gabor highlights, initially he highlights many physical manifestations of trauma, a lot to do with autoimmune, a lot to do with cancers, a lot to do with ailments and physical manifestations that are quite debilitating in life. Then I flipped the page. There is a page in the book where he describes these different conditions that he observed as a physician. You turn over the page and he says, but I also noticed that they have all of these personality traits. Goosebumps. Because I read these personality traits and I ticked almost every single box of those personality traits. I ticked them off. And I remember the moment and I was like, wait, these are the personality traits that I connect with. I've just read that they can manifest into these really debilitating, life-threatening, sometimes fatal illnesses.
Yeah.
And I just went, and it was that sliding doors moment. And I was like, I got goosebumps all over there. I have a choice. I have a choice here to goosebumps. I have the choice here to keep going down this path. And this is what may manifest. And, I had a lot of physical things happening in my life, and I still do as a result of, chronic stress, potential trauma, or, lots of things. And I couldn't let it go. I finished the rest of the book. I was enamored. I was like, and I think I was still finishing off the book. And this is so fascinating. An email appeared in my inbox, and it was a replay. I don't remember signing up for anything. It was that kismet moment, getting this email, a replay for like Rebirthing Breathwork Mastery training, like a info session or an FAQ or a like, let's learn more about this. I watched the replay, and I was like, what is this RBM? Like, and not only, and I watched it a number of times after that. And I kept coming back to Brendan, to my partner, and I said, I'm really curious about this. Like, it was the particular style. I'd never breathed this before. And I was like, there is something that I can't let go of. I filled in an application because it's an application process. So I really want to get aligned with where you are at. And all of a sudden then I got an email saying, well, yeah, which next retreat are you going to go to? Because I chose to do everything in person. And when can you sign up and pay? And I was like, here I am. And I landed in that. And I still can't believe how it turned up. Just before that, though, I had this massive energetic clearing. So we have someone that we know that does this big energy clearing, paid lots of money for it. And I remember saying to Brendan, I was like, fucking nothing's changing. Like we've paid all this money. And what I realized in reflection is that I read Garbo's book, I had the energy clearing, and then this showed up. And I think I don't know, energy had to shift before this could come into my inbox and me be ready for it. Because this could have shown up, I could have gone, I didn't sign up for this, I'm just not going to go with it.
Yeah.
And I remember that very first session on retreat, the retreats in Australia are done in Yukai, just outside of Murwillumbah, northern New South Wales. And I remember that first session, and I remember my teacher being there right beside me, actually. And she's like, you know, what's happening in your body? And I just said, I have so much pain. I'm holding so much pain in my body. And that week unfolded, and I just cannot believe the incredulous depths that I went to like, and so it's a 7-day retreat with 2 breathwork sessions a day, and they are up anywhere like 3 and 4 hours at, you know, with what the breathwork with RBM cycle is. And I came out of that, my intentions going in, I remember the first day was actually to feel whole and to be home in my body. And my intention was to feel full and complete. And so right at the end, we had a one word, you know, what was true for us in that moment, right at the end, that last day, my word was full. And I have connected with that recently again after the latest retreat in April. And I was like, I authentically and genuinely and just, I feel full in my body. And it's like, and I've got there all myself, and you know, it's been a real challenging journey.
It's been a journey. It really has.
But that's a very long answer to your question. But
that's what we're here for.
That's how I landed in RBM.
I remember, gosh, I don't know how many years ago. I know I was working for the publishing firm, and I worked with someone, I think it was her, that put me onto this healer again, like this energy working person. And I went to see her, and I think she did, I don't know if it's reflexology, Reiki, I don't know what she was doing, but basically I said, can I bring my sister along? You weren't very well at that stage. And I remember I took you along, it was out at Forest Lake. And she said then, and this is well before, like this was like, I would have been in my maybe 20 or very late teens. And so you're only 2 years older than me. And she said, your soul is not in your body. Wow, you're not in your body. That. Yeah. So when you said that, I was like, oh, I'm seeing some connections here.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah. And, you know, like, and what I've realized probably myself before that, but definitely through the process of unpacking a lot in RBM, is that I have lived out of my body. And it just got to the point just before I've received this email. I was in a tremendous lot of pain. I will share. I don't know if you know this. Everyone's going to know this, but
kind of dropping some bombs today.
Yeah, I am. But I was actually living in a really debilitating state of anxiety. I would experience panic attacks every weekend leading up to that. At the time, and I don't necessarily describe them as a panic attack, but it was what I think it was kind of a nervous system collapse.
Yeah.
You know, when you reach that point, and it's a real thing, like it is a real thing when you are, you know, I wouldn't even say overburdened, but when your nervous system gets to a certain point, and that's where I was, and it was crumbling my relationship, and but then, you know, that kind of compounded the shame and the embarrassment, and you know, it was at least once a weekend, sometimes twice. That's when Brendan and I were together. So, you know, I wasn't working at the time. He would go to work, this was what was the most challenging thing, really hard, is that we'd come together, and I'd be in that, and I didn't like going out. You know, we live on this beautiful property in Yamundi, and I didn't like going out into the world, and life was really painful. And I was still asking those questions, like, who am I? Why am I here? And what is my purpose? And one of my teachers in the ashram, and this has always stuck with me because it has definitely felt really true, is that it's when we're in crisis that we ask the deepest questions.
It's so true.
When we reach that edge point that actually does become so painful, when there's something that we just cannot do any longer, in all areas of life, you don't necessarily need to be in crisis, but I do think you need to fully meet your edge. Probably very similar to maybe, when you reach that edge in Aya, you can fully go through it. You can resist it. I'm sure you can resist it.
Oh, you can fight it, and it fights you back.
Yeah, right. So, but that's life. So in the experience of like, like I could resist all of this panic, but it just kept coming, and so it's when we reach those edge points, when we reach that crisis point, when we reach that point where we are lying on the floor and we feel like there's no other way out, it's when we actually ask the deepest questions, when you sit with that enough, you actually open, and what the image is coming to me is like a cyclone or a tornado, and it's like it's going is when you reach the eye of that storm where it's actually the calmest. And so there's storm around you, but when you reach that point, it actually all just, you get really calm, but you actually ask those bigger questions. And I think you are so open in this really like vulnerable but precious and sacred space. And I think, that's kind of what the Rebirthing Breathwork Mastery, like that's what you can get to in a session when you are like on the edge. And like I say, you can change the intention and can go a different direction, but when you are willing to be with that, when you're fully in that, and that's what it was for me. And I reached that point, and reflecting on the last 2 years, I just cannot believe, like speaking about being in my body, like I have moments, but like it's sometimes difficult to fathom what the last 2 years have been and where I was 2 years ago. This time 2 years ago, I was just signing up for, or just handing in that application for the training.
Retreat. Wow. Interesting. And so tell us a little bit about what people can experience, because you're a facilitator now.
I will just clarify that I'm right at the end of the 2-year training.
As when we're recording now in April 2025.
Absolutely. But I will graduate in July as a facilitator. So I can facilitate sessions now, but I am still right at the end of my training.
Beautiful. And so when people come to a retreat or have a session with you, how long does it go for? What does it look like? How does someone basically prepare? Do you have to be at the end of your tether, or can you be just being like, I love my life, let's go more expansive? And it's I relate this back to Tantra. Like Tantra is not a band-aid or a therapy session when you're on the edge of divorce. Right? People can come and they want to be like, I want to expand in my already phenomenal relationship. You don't have to get to the bottom of the pit to go for certain things that you're like, pull me back up out of this, please, breathwork or Tantra or yoga or whatever the thing is. And so yes, that can help. Yes, that can get you there. But tell me what it's like when people would generally come to a session. Where are they at in their life?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because
this episode of the Enlighten podcast is proudly sponsored by the Sanctuary of Self, your portal to self-discovery and creating a sanctuary within. At the Sanctuary of Self, our philosophy is rooted in the belief that true transformation begins with knowing yourself deeply. Here you will find my signature programs. It's the home of all of my Tantra offerings, including in-person sessions in Brisbane, workshops and trainings all around Australia. I invite you to start with the Flourish Collective membership, a nurturing sanctuary for personal growth and transformation. This membership offers a greenhouse of resources, including workbooks, meditations, and soulful self-paced practices designed to help you cultivate alignment, purpose, and self-love. At only $44 per month with no lock-in contract, you can access an abundance of resources, videos, ebooks, meditations, and workshops with new content added monthly. Head to sanctuaryofself.love for all the juicy details.
for me, it was that point. But you can't, let's go back to Rebirthing Breathwork Mastery. So the mastery part is actually like being like masterful in life. So that, going back to the tissue on the floor example, like if we're running from subconscious programming, we'll be activated by the tissue on the floor that our partner didn't pick up for the 5th time that day, and he just keeps walking.
What is wrong with Brendan and tissues?
No, I'm just going to use that example because that has been an activation point for me. Right?
Love that for you.
I know, right? It's been bigger than that sometimes. But,
if that's the extent of your problems, well done.
I know.
The tissue on the floor,
no,
you're doing good.
My problems extend well beyond that. But I use that as an everyday example because I think that, we can be activated by something that seems really simple and trivial.
Yeah.
But there is something, and, you could be at the end of your tether. You could have not had a good night's sleep. You could have, it could have been, you could be pressured in finances. You could have, the dog that's just weed on the floor as well. Or, like this. But these are everyday experiences, but it's the subconscious programming behind them that really activates us. So it's, it's like, it's not the tissue on the floor and the 5th time that Brendan's walked past it, but it's something that it's bringing up within us. It's a conditioning, it's a belief, it's something about ourselves or the world that runs in the background, and we think that it's the tissue in Brendan. It's not. And so maybe coming to a session so that, you do have this spaciousness in life, that you maybe do feel less activated, that you are, because maybe what would it give you, if you, what would it give you if you didn't activate, were activated by the tissue? Maybe it would give you a greater connection with your partner. Maybe it would just give you this spaciousness and this, like when you're in it and you just feel so restricted in your body and you're so tight.
Yeah.
It made you, what would it be like if you could just experience the freedom of like, it's a tissue, I'm just going to pick it up myself with no story behind it. And what does that give you? Like if you had that there, how is that spacious and that freedom like flowing out in everyday life with the relationship with your partner or your children or your work environment? Like you can definitely come with a specific thing, like, I didn't want to live in panic anymore, but my intentions were actually to feel more full in life, to not feel empty, and to cultivate home, and not even to cultivate home. I think home is always within, but to know home within, like to trust my body within and to trust that. But there are any aspect of life that where you're ready to shift that energy. What in life is happening that you don't want to be happening, or what is happening that you don't want to be happening. I have used RBM to create my website. I've never created a website before. I literally, like I set an intention and I did a breath session on the intention to create this website and it to flow easy. And I cannot believe how how that came to be, because what it did, it cleared whatever was in the way of me being able to authentically express myself and for the process to be easy. So just trying to, there are others that, there's so many things people come to breathwork for.
You can come for sort of everyday things. Like absolutely. You can come to, and there's always something underneath it. Like you said, the tissue thing, it's not the tissue on the floor. It's not that your partner left it there. It's the subconscious conditioning that you have underneath what is, at the surface, because a tissue on the floor to us growing up could have meant the wooden spoon.
Could have meant the wooden spoon.
Do you know what I mean? Sorry, Mum. But so it's not, you're right. Like it's not the tissue on the floor. It's the meaning behind it. We don't have access to that meaning in our conscious mind always. We might not be able to recall that memory the same way when I did a hypnosis session, which is on, it's like back in, I think it was in the first season. If you go back and listen to it, find my interview that I did with a fellow hypnotist, Jaden Boone. And we went back into, because I hate bananas. I hated bananas.
I remember the banana session.
Yeah, the banana session. Everyone knows
Yeah.
the banana session, because what happened is I have for like forever hated bananas, but referred to them as the yellow sticks of death. I'm like, I can't even have an acai bowl or a smoothie, because if you put 84 different ingredients into a smoothie,
And
all
one
I'll
banana.
taste is banana if
Yeah,
it's in
yeah,
there.
yeah.
And so I said to Jaden, I'm like, I haven't worked with anyone to change someone's mind about food for hypnotherapy. Can you help me? Let's do it live on a session. Oh, ha, ha, ha. Anyway, so we did it, and we went back, and I had this core memory of being in our home in Melbourne, being in my high chair and choking on banana.
Really? I didn't know
Yeah.
that part.
And I went right, and I can recall the memory that my subconscious showed me then, because Jaden took me back through
Yes.
like the timeline of where this started.
Yes.
So I'm choking on this banana, and I've grown up going, bananas are actually going to kill me. So I refer to them playfully as the yellow sticks of death.
But can you see how through the RBM lens that was a decision that you made at the time when you were so open, and you were very impressionable.
I was very impressionable. I was
as we all
Yeah.
are, from conception to 3 to even later in life. That's when we're solidifying all of these impressions about ourselves, about life, and about our caregivers. And you made a decision that it actively in life, in everyday life, you didn't have access to, and then during a session, whether it be hypnotherapy or this is what can unfold in an RBM session, is we can access where we've made these decisions, or we've created a belief, or we've had this conditioning or this program around that continues to play out in everyday life.
Yeah.
Because how often, I mean, you've done a lot of work, so a lot of hypnotherapy and a lot of self-work that gives you this greater self-awareness of these patterns. But I don't know, maybe beforehand, or, people listening will identify where, you're working towards something. It might be a really big project, or it might be a job that you're going towards, or maybe going to buy a new car, or these experiences in our life that are an expression of ourselves authentically, or a big transition or a big change. And we're like, yep. And we kind of like mentally are psyching ourselves up towards something. And then we continue to play out a pattern. We feel stuck and we feel thwarted. And we actually, I know for myself, then you don't fulfill it. Your excuse might be like, oh, I'm so great at procrastinating, and that's just who I am. I'm a procrastinator. But could you be open to the possibility that that procrastination is actually a pattern holding you back to protect you from
safety
something?
mechanism.
It's a safety mechanism.
Yeah, procrastination. So is perfectionism.
Totally.
Perfectionism is a safety for not putting yourself forward and out there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've noticed that within myself.
Because what would it be like if you put yourself, I'm not asking necessarily, but maybe old Jen, what would it, if you can remember, what would it be like if you weren't perfect and you put yourself out there?
Oh, it's the fear of judgment.
The fear of judgment.
Yeah.
So maybe somewhere early in life, you developed this fear of judgment because maybe something happened and you developed a belief about yourself, about being judged. And I feel like I see you as your younger self now.
Being judged? No,
just like I'm having so many visuals come through now of these times when we may have been younger and, we were limited in our expression. So maybe you are bringing something to life in life that is bringing something to light in life, or giving of yourself. And it may be like a program that you're trying to put out into the world. I'm trying to think of, experience, like, what people are doing a lot more these days, or, whatever, like, maybe it is going for the new job or that promotion, or, and it's putting yourself out there. But there's somewhere maybe very early in life that, that truest expression of yourself was limited, was capped, was restricted,
was reprimanded.
Yeah, I definitely align with being reprimanded. And so we kind of decide, maybe, I don't know, in my experience, maybe there was a decision to shut it down. And so therefore, unless you're being a particular way, maybe it is being perfect, and maybe you shut it down, because if you keep shutting it down, and that's the procrastination, then you don't move forward and you keep yourself limited, because actually that keeping yourself shut down and limited kept you safe. At one point in your life. But now, as an adult, wanting to move forward, wanting to bring your, like, express yourself in the world, bring a project to life, express yourself in a relationship, go for an expanded level of a relationship, you limit that, because you just don't have access to that
to the original piece.
And what is really, like, I've done a lot of work, and before RBM, actually, even I started my training, I was seeing a psychologist, and we'd get to those points, I'm like, oh, I see it, yeah, I could have made that choice. And even I was still seeing a psychologist when I started my RBM training, and I broke up with my psychologist because I was identifying things, but I was feeling like I was getting to the core issue, but nothing was still changing. What was changing was RBM, because in that altered state, and in that recall experience, in that regressed state, we can get to that point where you remember being 3 and you remember expressing yourself. Let's use this as an example. Maybe you were, like, really excited. Maybe you started singing, and you had someone, an adult, usually
older sister.
I'll acknowledge that I may have instilled some unconscious beliefs, but or often it's caregivers or those who are predominant in our life. They come in and they were in their process. They were in their own activation by you expressing yourself, and they shut that down. And so that plays out in life. And we can kind of, I've accessed that in psychology, and I'm like, oh, well, this happened in my life, and that's probably maybe the decision. But what doesn't change is the change,
the response to it, how your body responds, especially once you brought it up to the surface. And this is why I am so, I guess, passionate about any sort of modality where we go in and we unravel from a subconscious perspective, especially hypnotherapy, because hypnotherapy has been my jam for many years, is that there are some therapists, and I've had to help people undo this from working with shitty therapists before, is that they will bring it up, but then they don't do anything with it. So all they've done is uncover the pain, the trauma, the disharmony, the instability, whatever that is that's sitting under the surface. Yeah. And it's almost like, and this is why, like, a hypnotherapy session should never be an hour. You need hours upon hours to work with someone, because it's like, if we get to something, it's not like, I'm sorry, time's up, the other person's in the waiting room, I'll see you next week. When you extract, or when you unearth something within someone that has been sitting there, literally creating the path of their life moving forward. You've got a responsibility as a therapist or facilitator to support them through what they're going to do with that.
Yes. And that was the breakup point with the psychologist. I did an EMDR session, which, don't ask me what that stands for, but it's the eye movement. It's not hypnotherapy, but it can take you into a regressed state or memory. And I remember the session quite clearly. And it was late in the session that we did this. We usually do EMDR right at the end of the session. And anyway, did the session, and where I was in this altered state and in this experience. And I remember, like, not being ready to come out. Like, I had come to a fundamental belief and a really potent memory. And she then basically called time. And this, and I was so, I had enough behind me with RBM to go, that's just not right. You just don't say, as you said, like, time's up. I'm just going to go to the next person. And I remember that. And I had enough resources from my training at that point, that was early on, at the beginning when I was doing the inner work, to then, like, integrate properly. But it wasn't, it was not ideal. But that's what, I suppose, I think, I mean, I did EMDR quite a bit with the psychologist, and it wasn't changing a lot of my life. I had the realizations, but that's where, in the regress state and the altered, I will say altered state, but in those memories, you know, they come up when maybe we're a child, we made those decisions, we created the beliefs. There's the opportunity then to reprogram. And we do that from our adult selves. We do that from within the experience of being in our bodies. And then we can create new decisions, new beliefs about ourselves and about life and about those around us, that actually are then fortified on the cellular memory. And when it's fortified on the cellular memory and in the body, we've made new decisions. I remember, in fact, there's a memory that came up here, an experience early in life. And I went into the memory. It was quite a traumatic memory. And I, being in the session, being aware of what was happening, I wanted, you know, I was offered the opportunity to create a new belief, and I kind of, it was almost like I rewrote the memory, so that my experience of that memory is very different, and it completely changed so much for me. But I had that opportunity in the session. It's not like just remember and go back to that state, reveal all of this stuff. And it's like, and then what?
And then what? Yeah, because there has to be and then what? And I think this is where traditional therapy lets a lot of people down.
Yeah.
Because I hear about it so much. I've had people come to me saying, I've got more out of one session with you than I have with a psychologist in 5 years. And I love to hear that. But, and, you know, counseling, traditional psychology will always have its place, and there's always something for someone. You know, absolutely. If you want to go and talk about your feelings, go there. Do you know what I mean? If you want to do the deep inner work of rewiring, you need to go to someone that can take you into your body, into your subconscious, and work with you through that to reprogram. And unfortunately, the traditional model of psychology of, you know, it's not there. It doesn't exist. No. And for practitioners or for clinicians, they're bound under APRA that they can't do certain things within that modality. If they were to go outside of the box that they are trained in, and that they're told that they have to work under a certain like construct, essentially, they can't go outside of that, because they could, you know, risk losing their license, losing their membership.
Unless they're really kind of on the fringe. Had some fringe ones. But even still, like the psychologist that I was seeing was on the fringe. But it only took me so far, and I just, and it wasn't, I think I was seeing her for like 2 or 3 years. But it was then when I started training that, like in RBM and doing the deep dives myself, that's when life started changing. And like I say, I'm not going to say that RBM is a replacement for psychology or any work like that. It was my place. I needed to become, I think it was all part of my process.
It's always part of it's all part of a journey, because there is things that I've done in my life that have led me to the other things. And that's why we call life a journey, and it doesn't stop until you die, because everything, like, it's the same as the Gabba Mate book. You know, you had to go through this experience to be drawn to that book, to read the page, to get the email, to after having seen the healer. Like, there's all of these things that had to play out, which is part of the journey. And I love doing that. Like, I love going back on the journey. Like, even when I reflect on my relationship with Cass and how we came to be together, and all of the moving parts that had to happen, not only in my life, but also to happen in his life for us to come together. And we laugh about it. Like, we've done an episode already on like how we met. Like, it was the wildest story through me doing this gimmicky, like, oh, get your soulmate sketch done. And I was
still, like, you're pretty open to, you know, different things.
Oh, I am. And I'd had one of them done like years and years and years before, and like nothing came of it. And you just think, like, it's just one of those money grabs. Like, how could it be this? How could it? Anyway,
let's have fun with it.
Exactly. But for all of the things to even happen, for me to align to being in Perth to study Tantra, and not only for me,
Jen.
but my teacher, and I think I shared this in the episode that I did with Cass, is that I was supposed to study with her earlier last year. She was coming to the East Coast to teach in Sydney. And I had just finished writing my chapter of Wild Eros. And it was the start of the year, it was like March, and I was already starting to feel burnt out because I hadn't really taken a break over Christmas.
Yeah.
I was supposed to speak on stage in New Zealand, and I pulled the pin. And I'm not the type of person to pull pins on things.
I remember this.
Yeah. And I remember speaking to Kathy, my teacher, and I said, I really want to study Tantra, but I'm not going to be able to make it to Sydney for this one. Can you please let me know when the next one's on? And if it wasn't for her going through some health issues and some like feeling really burnt out, that she said, I'm actually not traveling to the East Coast for quite some time, but I will be running level 1 and 2 in Perth. If you want to train with me, because I'm going to take a break, you're going to need to come to Perth. And I was like, well, looks like I'm going to Perth. And if it wasn't for that, if it wasn't for, you know, this beautiful friend that I made who traveled from Melbourne, that we had the conversation, who asked me, do I have a partner? No, but I got this soulmate sketch drawing, you know, and if I hadn't have got my phone out at that very moment when she was like, oh my God, we have to see the guy. And Kathy walking past going, oh, I know that guy. You know, all of these like serendipitous moments that had to happen in all of our lives that had to come together. And so circling right around is that psychology brought you into a place of starting to go through things to uncover them. There is a time and a place for all of it, even the shit stuff. Even the stuff that completely throws us and derails us sometimes, essentially, from the path that we're on. I see those things. This is why we see every moment as a blessing.
And you know, when you move, in my experience, when you move through these processes, you begin to trust them. You trust the process. And you know, that's actually, you know, that's something that Alec establishes. You know, when you move through this and you begin to see that these things that unfold in life are not limiting you, that they are expanding you, you begin to trust the process. And if you trust the process of them unfolding, you ultimately trust life. And so Alec, you know, when we do the training and she speaks into that and she writes about that, and again, cognitively, knowledge-wise, I was like, I'm going to trust the process. And I've had these big experiences in the training that have brought me to my knees. And I'm like, what is this? Again, like, because, you know, when you start to open up this, you know, this expansion, lots of things start to unravel and unfold. You know, it's a journey of self-inquiry and self-awareness, but it's also a self-confronting journey. But you know, and I've reached those points, but each time I land in the expansion of I fully trust my process, and ultimately I fully trust life. And being able to experience that authentically from an in-body experience actually allows me to fully, in my body, trust the process of a breather. And you know, like, I could have intellectualized that, and it's written in my workbook, and this is what I'm supposed to do. But my level of trust for my process, so when something comes up now, I'm like, oh, so what is that revealing? And what is the opportunity in that? So when the material comes up, I kind of get a little bit excited, because I'm like, where is this expanding
content
into?
Exactly. What can I breathe about here? Absolutely.
Where can I shift in life
where
to feel more spacious?
And this right here is self-mastery. And it's not that you've mastered self. It is the journey of self. You know,
and 100%. Self with a capital S, you know, not like the ego self, but the self as in the overall consciousness of self. I mean, that's what I resonate with, and that's what's feel authentic to me.
And I always say, like, I always teach people that when we, you know, we'll touch on the ego very quickly. All the ego is the voice of the subconscious. The subconscious is all of the conditions, the beliefs, the programming, you know, the way in which we've viewed the world and stored those beliefs in our subconscious, the way that we hold them in our body. And so all the ego is the voice of that. It's that is the way in which we hear that voice in the mind. All it is the voice of the programming and the conditioning. And we do have the ability to change that. And one of the things that I teach everyone that comes to work with me is deciding what you want that inner voice to represent. I always refer to it as, you know, your mind is a garden. You have the choice. You're either pulling weeds constantly, or you're, you know, watering flowers. You know, you always have to tend to the garden, but it's the choice is yours. Are you constantly like trying to, you know, pull out all of the overgrown stuff that's got in the way, Or are you just like, oh my gosh, I love this little garden that I've created in my mind? And because that, like that right there, when you have a mind that knows how to support you, when you have that deep connection with self and that love for self, like that is true liberation.
Yeah.
That is self-mastery.
Yes.
But we've got our whole lifetimes that we have experienced of layers upon layers of conditioning that says that we're wrong or we've repressed something. So I think we get to adulthood and we're like, fuck, what have I got to decondition or unravel that I learned about the world in my early years? And we're not here to point fingers like, mum, this isn't a dig.
No, it's totally
We're not here to put anyone down, because, you know, our parents absolutely did the best with what they had and what they knew at the time, as did everyone in our lives.
I think that, you know, our lives are set up this way, and, you know, like, it is really fascinating that we're kind of speaking about the same thing. We use our different modalities, but you and I are actually speaking about the same thing.
Absolutely.
And, you know, we've had lots of times in life that we have not been speaking the same language.
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
You know, so but actually we are, and we've you know, and I you know, and it's interesting. I had a dear friend, another facilitator, read my astral chart. There's a particular part of my chart, and she was basically like unraveling my childhood, and she's like, you went through all of this, and she's like, but where it is in your chart is actually because it's your purpose. So you have to experience this because this is your purpose in life.
Yes.
And this is where I'm landing with being an RBM facilitator, is this is my purpose. I've tried many things, and I've done many things, and I have just not been fulfilled by them.
Yeah, absolutely. And this happens. Like, this is, when you land in a place of service to others, like I always say that your message is in your mess, right?
Yeah.
So what comes through, like hearing, you know, Joe's story today, if you've listened to any other podcast episode of mine, you'll hear me, you know, speak so openly about the work that I do and the place that I've come from because of that. It is when we can truly master those parts of ourselves that we can then go forth and teach other people. And this is why I love seeing people step into these modalities and go, I'm coming from a place of, you don't even have to be miles ahead. You need to be one step of someone else in order to take them on the journey with you. You know,
you don't even need to be a facilitator or a practitioner. Like, what if we could teach this to our children?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, what if we, like, and that's one of my, you know, seeing, you know, people move through RBM as breathers, and how that's rippling out into what their children, like, I have some really inspiring mums that seeing the self-awareness of their children and the in-body experience of their children is it's not just a motivation. I feel so fulfilled by it and inspired by it, and that's one of the things that keeps expanding me.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to quickly go back to the question, you know, like, what is RBM and what is a session?
Yes.
We haven't quite got there yet.
Circling back.
Circling back. One of the biggest foundations and emphasis in RBM is the intention before the breathwork session itself. And that comes into the mastery part, and it comes into what we were speaking about before, like, where in life are you feeling your biggest pain points, or the stuckness, or feeling thwarted? You know, those areas that you want to move forward into, but you're aware, you know, maybe you're not fully aware, but you know that there's the procrastination, or just always feeling stuck, or always activated or triggered by something. And you're motivated, you're feeling ready, maybe you're in pain enough, maybe you're just so willing to change that. And so these are where we have the foundation of the intention. And you know what? I think when you book in for an RBM session or a retreat, those intentions start to already bubble up in your body.
Always.
I'm sure you get this with clients as well.
Yeah.
And so and you know, we can have beautiful intentions. We can come in going like, my intention is to be enlightened in this lifetime. And yet, you know, going back to our example, tissue on the floor, the morning of your breathwork session sets you off.
Yeah.
And it's what's happening in life that you want or you don't want to be happening that really establishes that intention. Because that is the mastery part. Like, it's the living the everyday life. because, yeah, so, and that's, but, the process starts when we, feel the connection to come to an RBM session, when we book in that, and then kind of life will start to reveal what the intentions are. But it's getting really meaningful and really connected, and acknowledging maybe what happens in our body when we state our intention. And that's really important, to becoming aware of what that cellular memory is already telling us. So maybe, an intention, if we go back to our example, is, like if that tissue example is happening, let's say it's actually, I'd rather be, unperturbed. And what would that, like, what would that look like? That would be just like, maybe that's a deeper relationship with my partner. And what would that be like? Well, that would be, and what would that mean? Well, that would mean that we feel like we're journeying in life together, that we see the same things, right? And so we take that intention into the breathwork experience. Now, an RBM session is at least 90 minutes, and Alec formulated that from, and really came to acknowledge that through her experience, and just seeing where, when we start to breathe in a particular way, what comes up. We generally kind of move out of our experience around 90 minutes authentically, without, there is a time that's called, but there's no pressure. Like, it's all within your own gentle awareness of coming out of that. But usually it's a 90-minute session. So, if we're working one-on-one, it might be about half an hour or so of an intention. Then there's a 90-minute breath cycle. Now, as I was saying earlier, the breath cycle is a longer, slower, fuller than usual breath. So we invite the breath to actually, like, we're engaging our whole breathing mechanism, our belly, our chest, right up to our upper chest, going just past our habitual intake, our regular intake, feeling really quite full, but no force or straining or discomfort. And it's in and out through the nose. And then we begin to connect the breath. So it's a circular breath. It's where the inhale moves into the exhale, and the exhale moves into the inhale. And that is the breath style that is offered. To hold that for 90 minutes is pretty impossible. But what we're doing is we're bringing the consciousness to the breath as well. And as we do that, and during the breath cycle, we will have so many levels of experience. We'll have the physical, like I was saying. So there might be numbness, tingling. One leg might feel longer than the other. You might get headache. You might get a racing heart. But we're bringing awareness to sometimes the physical sensations that arise. There are there's the mental level of experience. So images, visuals, memories. It may be your shopping list for the afternoon, whatever that is, it's actually bringing our awareness to it and not disconnecting from it, thinking, I should come back to my breath.
Yeah, stop thinking. Stop thinking. Yeah,
and that's the big difference between meditation and yoga, where we, and like the emotional level as well, we want to move towards the emotions. We want to really be with that experience of fear, of love, of bliss, and use the breath to amplify that. We're using the breath to amplify all levels of experience, whether they be the feelings, the emotions, whether that be the images, or whether that be physical sensations. And that's the difference between yoga and meditation. And some styles of breath work, we kind of push them away, and there's like, no, that's not what we're doing. We're breathing here.
Clear your mind.
Exactly. Clear your mind. Rather than disconnecting from them, we're moving fully into them. And then there's a spiritual experience. Now that is so deeply personal. In sessions that I've had with a spiritual experience, I have seen ancestors fully around me, that I have connected with Nonna. I have been surrounded by the Indigenous people of this country, of this earth, and the earth that I've been on when I've been breathing. I've had the experience of that oneness and wholeness. And so we move through, and you can have all of that at one time. And as I said, the facilitator is there to support the session, but the facilitator never guides a session. So we will lead in, and we will, explain basically the breath style. But, like, what happens in a session is ultimately self-generated, related to your intention. So if whatever comes up in session is always related somehow to your intention and will reflect what's happening in life around you.
Of course.
So
yeah.
any sounds that you hear around the room, or if you're with other people, or sounds from outside, or I've had sessions where there's been a loud noise outside and I've been activated by it, and actually took me into this incredible regressed process. But and so bringing all of that into a session. Like I say, there is no agenda by a facilitator. The facilitator is there and you can dialogue. And so you can, like speak through your experience. And the facilitators have, have their own experience and have their own ways of kind of really amplifying your self-awareness of what's happening in the session. But in no way that there's a agenda for, what's the word? Intervention. There's no intervention, and so that's the cycle. It's 90 minutes. And then slowly we come out of the session again, using our breath. And then what is really also foundational to RBM is the debrief process. So, that's where you can relate what happened in the session to your intention and how that relates to life. And sometimes, like, I've had sessions and it's been part of my process where I'm like, nothing's happening in this session. I'm just lying here and I can hear everybody else and nothing's happening. And then of course, in the debrief, I'm like, well, what was my intention? And where is nothing happening in my life?
I love that.
And that connected to some really big process. I was on retreat at the time. And so the next breathwork session was so revelatory because I stayed with that experience. We want to stay with whatever our experiences are. I stayed for 90 minutes and nothing's happening. It's like nothing's happening in life. That was my material at the time. And so then the debrief is used to really integrate that experience. Now, we don't need to come to a release or a resolution in a session to actually allow, we can allow the session to be what it is. And actually the integration follows out in life. The release and the resolution comes out in life. Like you were saying with your ceremonies and ceremonies, you allow your space to unfold that.
Yeah.
And then you will start to see in life, not just after the session. Like, I know what it's like to be in a session to go, oh, nothing's changed. I've just breathed for 90 minutes and nothing happened and I don't see the change yet. But then I see changes when I relate to people or I interact with life or I move and all of a sudden I'm creating a website or, and you can be, and that's where the fascinating and intriguing process is. It
doesn't have to be this grand energetic shift like this, like comes in the night kind of thing. And it's just like, woof, it's here.
Yeah.
It can be very much things just start to shift very gentle. It's the subtleties to look for.
And that's what RBM really honors. RBM honors the subtle. There's no, like a lot of there are many other breathwork styles that focus on the catharsis and focus on the the
big energy.
The big energy.
Yeah.
And that, I've had sessions of big energy, absolutely. But I've, had the subtle is one of the most profound levels of experience when we can sit with the subtle. And that's what Alec really emphasized is that we can create new ways of being by honoring our subtle. And that, and you think about the breath, the breath is full and it's, it's meeting the edge of our breath, but it's also subtle. It's in and out through our nose. It activates sympathetic. And, there's this emphasis. But, like the catharsis might come through, but it comes through when it's authentic. It's spontaneous.
Yes,
it's
you don't try and like,
you can't, you
can't
don't try.
make it. You can't force it.
And you can kind of, as a facilitator, you can kind of like, when you attune to a breather, and it's definitely a process of deep attunement with a breather, while it's not, and it's not an agenda, but when you attune to the energy, you can kind of see, and we all have these practices, and it's a cultural conditioning around, well, to make something happen, we have to make something happen.
Yes.
We have to have the cathartic, energy driven, like dynamic shift for something to happen and change. But I've experienced, and what I see is when it doesn't come from an authentic place, it doesn't actually change anything.
This is true. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Amazing. This has been such a phenomenal conversation to have. I've learned so much. I know. And we can definitely get you back on for another episode to keep talking about these things. Now you've got a number of different offerings. So obviously, by the time we go to air, you've got an upcoming retreat. Tell us about that.
I do. It's a retreat that I'm holding with my teacher. We're co-facilitating together, co-creating together on the Sunshine Coast in Doonan, so just outside of Yamundi. I know many people know Yamundi. And that is a weekend retreat. It's a 2-day retreat. So it's a Saturday and the Sunday with 2 full RBM sessions each day, an organic lunch and beverages and refreshments, likely cacao included. And you can come for the whole weekend or you can come for a day. So it's 4 sessions over that weekend. And we'll link to my website or Instagram.
We'll pop the website and your Instagram into the show notes. Yeah. As far as people booking in for one-on-one sessions with you,
that is totally
Southeast
possible.
Queensland,
Queensland.
Northern,
you know what?
Northern New South Wales,
all over the world.
So can you do it via Zoom?
I can.
You can. So it's not just an in-person experience. Yeah. Amazing.
Because there is an energy of safety that's created within the container, with our attuned psyches. And that can be great because you can be within your own environment that does feel safe. I personally prefer in-person sessions, but I have had profound experiences online. At the moment, I am, there are spaces that are available that I can have in-person sessions and facilitate sessions in person on the Sunshine Coast. That is a possibility, and all of those details are also on the website. So people can book online straight up on my website. And then I'm just about to add details for in-person sessions as well.
Amazing.
So and then later in the year, I'm creating a couple of more retreats, probably based in Northern New South Wales.
Beautiful.
At least weekends or 3-day retreats, again, co-creating with other facilitators. And it's an incredible experience to be in a room with people, and it's so fascinating, the energy that aligns, that allows us to actually connect with what's true for us as well. You would know from retreats too, that the energy that's created when these random people come together. Yeah,
so random. Yeah, so divinely orchestrated too.
And it's such a deepening of the process. Like I love in person, and it is an individual journey, but it's actually really the energy that's co-created in a retreat is phenomenal. I'll say that.
I love that. Amazing. Well, Joanne, Sanna, thank you so much for joining me on the Enlightened podcast.
Thank you.
You've been absolutely incredible, and thanks for being such a beautiful sister.
I love you, Jen. Thanks.
Love you. Thank you so much for joining me for this episode. I hope you love the Enlightened podcast, and the biggest compliment you can give me is subscribing to this podcast, sharing it, and leaving a rating and review. Feel free to follow me on Instagram. My handle is @JenHamiltonOfficial, and the podcast handle is Enlightened_podcast. You can also find the video version on YouTube on my channel. Just search Enlightened, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a beautiful day and enjoy living the enlightened journey of life.